At just 11 years old, Black Marcus had a knack for capturing the world around him. Today, he was drawing a small group of children playing tag under a massive oak tree. His hand moved with precision, creating soft lines that hinted at the laughter and joy surrounding him. He checked the time on his watch, a gift from his mother, Judge Evelyn Carter. She always said, "Time is your most valuable currency. Spend it wisely." She dropped him off at the park earlier, promising to return in an hour after her meeting. Until then, Marcus was perfectly content to sketch and enjoy the breeze. But the peace didn't last long. From across the park, Officer Bradley's cold, scrutinizing eyes landed on Marcus. Bradley was tall and broad, his presence intimidating. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine. But his expression carried a perpetual scowl, like he was always looking for trouble. He adjusted his belt, the holster of his gun shifting slightly, and began making his way toward Marcus. The laughter and chatter around them seemed to dim as his heavy boots crunched on the gravel path. Marcus, lost in his sketch, didn't notice the approaching storm. Bradley stopped a few feet away, towering over the boy. His shadow loomed over the sketch pad, prompting Marcus to look up. "What do you think you're doing here, boy?" Bradley's voice was sharp, each word dripping with disdain. Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm just drawing, sir." He held up his sketch pad as if to prove his innocence. Bradley snorted, his lip curling. "Drawing? Huh? You don't look like you belong here." The word stung, but Marcus kept his composure. "I'm waiting for my mom. She's picking me up soon." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I know your type. Loitering, causing trouble. Empty your pockets." Marcus's heart raced. He could feel the weight of every eye in the park on him now. Mothers paused mid-sentence, joggers slowed their pace, and even the kids stopped playing to watch the scene unfold. "I'm not lying," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. "My mom's a judge. She'll be here soon." Bradley laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "A judge, huh? That's the best excuse you've got? Empty your pockets now, or I'll do it for you." Marcus hesitated, glancing around at the silent crowd. He could see phones being pulled out, cameras recording, but no one stepped in. No one said a word. Bradley's patience snapped. He grabbed Marcus by the arm, his grip bruising, and yanked him to his feet. "I said, empty your pockets. Let go of me," Marcus cried, tears welling up as he struggled against the officer's iron grip. Bradley's face twisted in anger. He grabbed Marcus by the collar and pushed him against the bench, his hand moving to his radio. "I've got a suspect at the park," he muttered into it. "I'm not a suspect," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "My mom's coming. She'll—" "Enough," Bradley barked, cutting him off. He tightened his grip, ignoring Marcus's pleas. The crowd watched, some murmuring in disapproval, but no one dared intervene. A woman held her phone steady, recording the entire ordeal. "This isn't right," she whispered to the man beside her, who nodded but did nothing. Marcus's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. "My mom, she's gonna be mad at you," he said between sobs. Bradley chuckled darkly. "I'd like to see her try." But little did he know, Judge Evelyn Carter was already on her way. The park fell into an eerie silence, with only the distant chirping of birds breaking the tension. Officer Bradley's grip tightened on Marcus's arm as the boy squirmed, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus pleaded, tears streaming down his face. His sketch pad fell to the ground, the pencil rolling off the bench and landing near Bradley's boot. Bradley ignored him, his voice booming as he barked into his radio. "Possible juvenile delinquent in the park. No ID. Send backup." Finally, the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A woman with curly hair and glasses stepped forward cautiously. "Officer, he's just a kid. You don't have to treat him like that." Bradley turned sharply, his glare cutting through her. "Stay out of this, lady, unless you want trouble too." His hand hovered over his holster, a gesture that made her back away immediately. Marcus looked up, desperation etched across his young face. "Please, just call my mom. She's a judge. Judge Evelyn Carter. She's coming here." Bradley let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Judge Carter? Sure, kid. And I'm the President of the United States. Now shut it before you make things worse for yourself. The crowd began to inch closer, emboldened by the injustice they were witnessing. More phones were raised, capturing every moment. A young man in a hoodie muttered to his friend, "This is gonna go viral. That cop's gonna regret this." But Bradley was oblivious. He was too caught up in his own narrative, too wrapped in his own authority to notice the ripple effect of his actions. Marcus, his voice still shaking, tried once more. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just waiting for my mom. She's gonna be so mad at you." Bradley smirked. "Oh, I'm terrified. Let me tell you something, boy. People like you don't scare me. You think dropping some judge's name is gonna get you out of this? Not today." And with that, Bradley grabbed Marcus by the collar and began dragging him toward his squad car parked at the edge of the park. The boys' cries echoed through the air, and the crowd finally started voicing their outrage. "This is too much. Leave him alone. He's just a kid." But no one dared to step in, fearful of what Bradley might do next. Marcus, through his tears, shouted one last time, "My mom's gonna make you pay for this." Bradley stopped abruptly, turning to the crowd with a smirk plastered on his face. "You hear that, folks? His mom's gonna make me pay. Guess I better start shaking in my boots." He turned back toward his car, dragging Marcus along. But before he could take another step, a new voice sliced through the chaos. "Officer Bradley." The voice was sharp, commanding, and filled with a quiet fury that froze everyone in place. Bradley stopped mid-step, his shoulders stiffening. He turned slowly, the smirk fading from his face as he saw her. Judge Evelyn Carter. She was dressed sharply in a navy blazer and slacks, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached. Her presence was electrifying, her expression one of pure, unrelenting determination. Marcus's face lit up. "Mom!" he cried, relief washing over him. Evelyn's gaze flicked to her son, then back to Bradley. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with an anger that made even the birds in the trees go silent. "What?" she began, her voice calm but deadly. "Do you think you're doing to my son?" Bradley faltered for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Ma'am, this boy was causing trouble in the park." He refused to identify himself and Evelyn cut him off with a raised hand. "Stop talking." The crowd was completely still now, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. "Let me make this perfectly clear," Evelyn continued, stepping closer to Bradley. "That boy is my son. He was sitting on that bench, sketching, waiting for me. And you decided to harass him, assault him, and humiliate him in front of all these people. Do you know who I am?" Bradley swallowed hard, but tried to play it off. "I don't care who you are." He was loitering. "You don't care who I am?" Evelyn's voice grew louder, her anger seeping through. "Then let me remind you, I'm Judge Evelyn Carter, and you just assaulted the son of one of the highest-ranking judges in this state." The murmurs in the crowd turned into gasps. Bradley's face turned pale. He stammered, suddenly at a loss for words. Evelyn stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? Not only did you traumatize an innocent child, but you did it in front of an entire park full of witnesses. Cameras are rolling. People are recording. And I assure you, Officer Bradley, this will not end well for you." Bradley's confidence crumbled. He glanced around, realizing for the first time the number of phones pointed in his direction. The crowd was no longer silent. They were openly condemning him, emboldened by Evelyn's presence. I was just doing my job," Bradley muttered weakly. Evelyn tilted her head, her expression one of disbelief. "Your job? Is this what you call doing your job? Choking a defenseless child and dragging him out of a park for sketching? I'll make sure Internal Affairs gets a detailed report of your work ethic." Marcus, still clutching his mother's arm, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, he wouldn't listen to me. He said you wouldn't scare him." Evelyn's lips curled into a thin smile. "Is that so?" She turned back to Bradley, who was now visibly sweating. Before she could say another word, a patrol car pulled up, two officers stepping out. They looked from Evelyn to Bradley, their expressions quickly shifting from confusion to alarm as they pieced together the situation. "Judge Carter," one of them said, addressing her with a respectful nod. "Is everything okay here?" "No," Evelyn said firmly. "Everything is not okay. Your officer here has just assaulted my son without cause. I want him removed from this park immediately and placed under investigation." Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. The other officers exchanged a glance before nodding. "Yes, ma'am," one of them said, stepping forward to escort Bradley away. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause as Bradley was led to the patrol car, his head hung low. Evelyn turned to face them, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you for standing by my son," she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "But remember, this isn't just about him. This is about making sure people like Officer Bradley are held accountable for their actions." Marcus looked up at his mother with a small smile. "I told him you'd make him pay." Evelyn smiled back, brushing a tear from his cheek. "And you were absolutely right." The park was still buzzing with murmurs as the patrol car carrying Officer Bradley disappeared around the corner. People lingered, their expressions a mix of disbelief and admiration for Judge Carter's commanding presence. Marcus stood close to his mother, his small frame leaning into her for comfort, though his eyes were filled with newfound pride. Evelyn knelt to his level, brushing some dirt off his shirt. "Are you okay, baby? Did he hurt you?" Marcus shook his head but hesitated. "Not really, but he scared me, Mom. He grabbed me so hard, and he didn't listen when I tried to tell him who you were." Evelyn's jaw clenched, her fingers curling slightly as she suppressed the anger still burning in her chest. She glanced at the crowd, many of whom were still recording or taking photos. This wasn't just a moment of personal outrage. It was a moment to make a statement. She stood tall, her voice ringing out loud enough for everyone to hear. "To everyone who witnessed this today, I want to thank you for speaking up and documenting what happened. People like that officer thrive in the shadows, where they think no one is watching. But today, he learned that he's not above the law." Applause rippled through the group. Some people shouted words of encouragement, while others simply nodded in agreement. One older man stepped forward, tipping his hat. "You're a good woman, Judge. We need more like you." Evelyn offered a small, gracious smile. "Thank you. But this isn't over. This is just the beginning." As the crowd began to disperse, Evelyn turned to Marcus and placed her hands firmly on his shoulders. "I need you to be brave for just a little while longer, okay? We're going to make sure this never happens to you, or anyone else again." Marcus nodded, his small hands gripping her blazer. "I trust you, Mom." Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat in her office, the desk stacked with legal briefs and case files. But at the center of it all was a single folder labeled Officer Bradley, Incident Report. The video evidence from the park had already gone viral, and her phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from media outlets and advocacy groups. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she replayed the events in her mind. Bradley's arrogance, his blatant abuse of power. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about every child, every person who had ever been silenced or mistreated by someone hiding behind a badge. Her assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana, knocked and entered without waiting for a reply. "Judge Carter, you're not going to believe this. What is it?" Evelyn asked, straightening in her chair. Dana handed her a file. "I did some digging on Officer Bradley. Turns out, he's been the subject of 3 previous complaints: racial profiling, excessive force, and harassment. But every single one was swept under the rug." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course they were. Let me guess. He's got someone protecting him in the department?" Dana nodded. "The police chief. They're old friends. But here's the kicker. Bradley's up for a commendation next month. Can you believe that?" Evelyn's eyes flashed with determination. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The next day, Evelyn stood behind a podium outside the courthouse, flanked by civil rights activists and community leaders. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for the best angle. Marcus stood off to the side with Dana, holding his sketch pad tightly. Evelyn adjusted the microphone, her voice steady but powerful as she addressed the crowd. "Yesterday, My son was the victim of an unwarranted and unlawful act of aggression by a police officer who thought his badge made him untouchable. But let me make one thing clear. No one is above the law. Not even those who are sworn to uphold it. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Evelyn held up her hand for silence. This isn't just about my son. This is about accountability. This is about ensuring that every child, every citizen, can walk into a park, a store, or down the street without fear of being targeted because of the color of their skin. She paused, letting her words sink in. I am calling for a full investigation into Officer Bradley's conduct, as well as the department's handling of previous complaints against him. This is not a request. This is a demand. More cheers followed, and Evelyn glanced over at Marcus, who gave her a small, encouraging smile. She smiled back, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Later that evening, as Evelyn was reviewing documents in her living room, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man in plain clothes, his expression unreadable. He introduced himself as Detective Harris, an officer from Bradley's precinct. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice low. Off the record, Evelyn hesitated, but stepped aside to let him in. Harris looked around nervously, as if expecting to be followed, before speaking. I've been on the force for 15 years, he began, and I've seen a lot of things I'm not proud of. But what Bradley did to your son, that crossed a line. And it's not the first time. Evelyn folded her arms. Go on. Harris took a deep breath. The department's been covering for him. The chief looks the other way, and anyone who speaks up gets reassigned, or worse. But I'm done staying silent. I have files, records, emails, proof of everything. Evelyn's eyes widened. Why are you telling me this? Because someone has to, Harris said simply. And I think you're the one who can actually do something about it. With Harris's evidence in hand, Evelyn moved quickly. She filed formal complaints, called for a federal investigation, and worked with community leaders to expose the corruption within the department. The media latched onto the story, turning it into a national conversation about systemic racism and police accountability. Bradley was suspended pending investigation, and the police chief faced mounting pressure to resign. Evelyn knew the battle wasn't over, but she also knew she had the upper hand. One evening, as she tucked Marcus into bed, he looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. Mom, do you think that cop will ever hurt someone else again? Evelyn brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Not if I can help it. And if he does, there'll be people like us ready to stop him. Marcus smiled, his faith in his mother and in justice restored. The next morning, the city woke up to a storm of media coverage. News stations ran the footage of Officer Bradley choking Marcus on loop, accompanied by headlines like, Racist Cop Targets Judge's Son and Justice versus Corruption. The Evelyn Carter case? Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #AccountabilityNow, with thousands demanding answers and action. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee while scrolling through her phone. The sheer volume of support was overwhelming, but she also noticed a darker undercurrent. Comments defending Bradley, criticizing her for making it about race, and even personal attacks questioning her integrity as a judge and a mother. Marcus shuffled into the room, rubbing his eyes. Mom, why are people saying mean things about us online? Evelyn pulled him onto her lap, holding him close. Because some people don't like it when others stand up to them, baby. But remember, the truth is on our side. We're doing what's right. He nodded, though the worry in his eyes lingered. Evelyn kissed the top of his head, silently vowing to shield him from as much of the backlash as possible. Later that day, Evelyn arrived at a community rally held in front of City Hall. The crowd was massive, parents with their children, activists holding signs that read "No Justice, No Peace," and "Protect Our Kids," and even a group of retired police officers who stood in solidarity against Bradley's actions. The energy was electric as Evelyn took the stage. Behind her stood Detective Harris, Dana, and a group of community leaders who had rallied to her cause. Evelyn adjusted the microphone, her voice firm yet passionate. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. This is about a system that allows people like Bradley to abuse their power without consequence. It's about a culture that teaches our children to fear those who are supposed to protect them. The crowd erupted into cheers, but she raised her hand for silence. We demand accountability. We demand justice, not just for my son, but for every child, every person who has ever been mistreated by those sworn to serve and protect. She paused, scanning the crowd. But this fight isn't mine alone. It's ours. And together, we will make sure our voices are heard. As the crowd roared, Marcus stood at the edge of the stage, his chest puffed out with pride. For the first time since the incident, he didn't feel small or scared. He felt powerful. Weeks later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed, with reporters lined along the back walls and protesters chanting outside. Evelyn couldn't participate directly due to her position as a judge, but she sat in the gallery every day, her presence a silent but powerful statement. The prosecutor, a fiery young attorney named Rachel Kim, presented a mountain of evidence: video footage from the park, testimony from witnesses, and the damning files provided by Detective Harris. Bradley's defense attorney tried to paint the incident as a misunderstanding, but it was clear the tide had turned against him. On the third day of the trial, Marcus took the stand. Evelyn's heart clenched as he walked up, looking so small yet so determined. The prosecutor knelt to his level, speaking gently. "Marcus, can you tell us what happened that day in the park?" Marcus nodded, his voice steady despite the weight of the room. "I was playing with my sketchbook when the officer came up. He said I wasn't allowed to be there, but I told him my mom said I could. Then he grabbed me and wouldn't let go." The prosecutor smiled encouragingly. "And how did that make you feel?" Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting to Evelyn before he answered. "It made me feel like I didn't matter. Like I was bad, even though I didn't do anything wrong." A hush fell over the courtroom. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, but forced herself to stay composed. This was Marcus's moment, and he was shining. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a few hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood, clearing her throat. "In the case of Officer Bradley, we find the defendant guilty of assault, misconduct, and abuse of power." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Bradley's face twisted in disbelief, but Evelyn didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Marcus, who sat beside her, his small hand clutching hers tightly. As the judge announced Bradley's sentence, 3 years in prison and a permanent ban from law enforcement, Evelyn felt a weight lift off her chest. It wasn't just about justice for Marcus anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about proving that no one was untouchable. In the months that followed, Evelyn worked tirelessly to implement reforms within the police department. Detective Harris was promoted, and a new police chief was appointed, a woman of color with a reputation for integrity and transparency. Community outreach programs were established, and officers underwent mandatory training on racial sensitivity and de-escalation. Evelyn also founded a nonprofit organization, Marcus's Voice, dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and advocating for systemic change. The organization quickly gained national recognition, with donations pouring in from across the country. If you were the judge and discovered this happened to your child, how would you deliver justice? Please share your opinion in the comments and support us by subscribing to the channel and liking our videos for more interesting stories.